Hi, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be going and breaking down my Oddwin sample flip competition entry. As noted in the description of the original SoundCloud link, everything in this track except the drums and one impact and obviously my tag was made from the original sample. Like all the growls, everything was just the original sample, just affected to hell. And I just wanted to explain it how I did it, both as a proof of concept as well as maybe also as an inspiration for some people. Maybe try doing something like this because it is a lot of fun. Kind of cool to do something different. While I was doing this, I was really inspired by Virtual Riot's little entry in one of Andrew Huang's earlier videos. I think it was the 4 producers flip one sample, like the first one or something. And he basically did exactly what I did here, where he made an entire track only using, I think it was a piano. And I was like, okay, I'll do the same because I think it'd be fun. So I made this little electro house track and I thought it ended up sounding really cool. Let's just jump right in. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the intro. You have this first, obviously I just put the original sample with a couple of changes. I have a little octave switches here and with it's filtered in and it has a little bit of chorus on it, and I had to EQ it a little bit so it fit overall in the mix better, but that's about it. Oh yeah, OTT I guess as well as there. Yeah, that's just the original sample just filtered in. And then the first thing that I did for the intro is I made this little color glitchy thing. This is the original sound. So basically, what I did was I took the original sound, ran it through pitch map. The original sample never reached the root minor chord. It always only played at, I think it was the 4th, and then the 6th and the 7th played the most. So I ended up using pitch map to kind of get it to a pitch I really wanted to hit. But if you don't know what pitch map is, for those of you who don't make color bass, basically it's a FFT pitching algorithm. What it does is that it's essentially auto tune, but it can tune stuff polyphonically, and because it's not perfect, it gives out some artifacts which ended up kind of helping the sound a little bit. I just played it to a D minor scale and I removed the third scale. I just removed those. I think it just adds a lot of dissonance, so I removed it. It's running through a portal which gives it that glitchy effect. It's this is preset called skimming, and then it goes through a vocoder and an OTT. So that's that sound. To make it a little bit fit a little bit better, I resampled it so I can make it a little nicer. And there's a couple of variations of this. It's just a matter of finding a different part of the sample. Here it's yeah, so it's the same thing. It just has a couple more effects on it. That's about it. And then in the background, there's also just the build, the resample of the stabs and the drop, which I'll go over later. It builds up over here. And then this is a cool thing that I did. I made I don't know what the idea was. I heard this sound playing in my head and I was like, I need to have that in here. It almost sounded like the Among Us sound, the sound. I don't know why, but so I thought I wanted to really bring that out. So I think it's the original sample, but with an EQ that only hits one specific note, and then there's a comb filter before it, so it's really bringing out that one note. So essentially it's just making a sine wave from the little thingy by just finding one harmonic and bringing that out. And what I did is I have a low layer, mid one, and then a very high one. It's almost just additive synthesis at that point. I overdrive them together, reverb and a little bit of EQ. It kind of it sounds more like a brass instrument than a cello, but it sounds like it's playing together. I don't know how to explain it, but it's cool. It ended up working really well. And then there's also these risers that were also made from the original sample. So there's the main riser was kind of the starting point for all of it, because the rest is either just a resample of it, a reverse, or made it faster. I also kind of learned this from that Virtual Riot video I was talking about earlier. I used a granulator. And basically what the granulator does is that it just plays a small snippet of the sample over and over again, and it gets faster and faster as the pitch goes up. So it's yeah, and to kind of help with that pitching upwards, I also added a delay that slowly gets smaller. So essentially it's becoming a comb filter. And the rest of these parts are kind of just the same thing, just redone, remade. The downlifter is just made from that original riser but reversed, and it has a little bit of more reverb and stuff on it. And then the fast riser that happens here is the same riser, but it has an auto pan on it. Drop riser is the same as well. It's just the same thing with an auto pan. Yeah, that's the effects and stuff. That's pretty much the same effects for the entire track. I didn't really feel like making different risers, so I just kind of used the same one. There's this little zap. That's actually made from that little downlifter I was showing earlier. I first found the portion of that part that I really wanted to keep. Essentially, zaps are made from sine waves like going down rapidly. So I kind of used the EQ to like peak one point, and I used a drum bus to also like add a little bit of sine waves. I don't know if this really does anything, but it just adds like, I think what happens more is the drive is actually doing something, so it's kind of useful. The first shifter is what's making the zap sound effect, and the second shifter is just shifting it down a little bit more because I don't want to mess with this one that much. Some compression, and then the thing that makes it a little bit more zappy is this convolver here, which is using the disperse 80 milliseconds impulse, and it goes into another disperser as well, which really adds to the zap, and then a spiff to basically just make it more transient-y. The impact is the only thing other than the drums that's not from the original sample. I just could not figure out how to get this in like an impact from the sample to sound good. I tried everything and yeah, that's the only thing that's not from the original thingy other than the drums. We go into the first drop, so that first growl you hear here, that's made from basically taking the sub of the sound and then turning it into a saw wave. So you can see here, this is really, really goofy, but there's 3 dynamic tubes back to back. The bias goes upwards as the sound progresses to almost make it sound like a wavetable. Some saturation, the autofilter, and the 2 autofilters help with like the actual like growl, and then the formant filter gives it that making it sound a little bit better, because without it sounds really bland, I would say. For any of you guys who do dubstep, you already know, just like OTT the hell out of it. Saturation, overdrive. Resampled it because it made it a little bit easier to use. So under that, there's also just a hit of the original sample. And this happens quite a lot. I'll just like chop up the little parts of it to accentuate certain areas. So this has like, I think it sounded good, so I left it. And then there's also this pad in the background that is just the original sample with chroma to pitch it, because I pitched it down a little bit, or up, I guess. I think without the chroma, it sounds goofy. It sounds off key, but then with the chroma. And then on top of that, I also put a shaper box to give it some like. And then there's so then let's go into like the main part, which is like these little stabs here. This was made from the sample, chopped into really, really small pieces. So basically I just took, it's not in key, but but again, I put a chroma before that. There's some morph. Basically the morph is morphing to itself, which ends up adding like a timbre to the sound, which ended up sounding really good. Like without it, it sounds like this. With it. And it ended up sounding a little bit more beefier overall, so I left that, and I thought that sounded a lot better. Double OTT, some vocoding that's happening here that's just like vocoding to itself to give it a little bit of like a watery feel. And some trash. And then on top of that, there's also this top layer, which is the same kind of concept as taking like a really small short part of the sound and then putting it through a pitch map instead of chroma, because I wanted to get like that like annoying pitch map kind of sound that usually comes from purifying the hell out of stuff. And then I distort like a lot of it. It's actually going through this thing called filter table, which is really cool because without it, it sounds like this. And with it, it just adds like a lot more like spectral things that are happening in the sound. And then there's just some more distortion and like disperser. The sub is just the sub from the original sample. I just cut out everything except the sub and then distorted it a little bit to get it more beefier. Then there's like these like the saw arp that happens in the first fill. So this is like a really, really small portion. This is almost kind of cheating because I essentially just made a wavetable, or like a wave from distorting the hell out of the sub. Like I wanted to get like a saw wave sound. So this is the same thing that was used to make the growl. That was without any of the other filtering and stuff. And it gives you like this like saw-y kind of sound. So I took a really, really small portion of it and made it into like a little saw thing. We also have like in the first fill, we have this like yoi thingy. So this is chopped from another sound design thing here. So this is taking that same thing I was talking about earlier, the little like thingy, the annoying like saw sounding thingy. So it's that with the auto filter, which goes into a bit crusher, and then OTT, and then saturation, disperser, and spiff. And then I chopped it up and added a little bit more effects here to make it a little more cleaner. It's just a lot more. And there's also this little bongo type sound. This is how it sounds without any effects. It's really stupid. So then the echo mode really is carrying here, but without the echo mode, it kind of just sounds like the same thing with the disperser. But I used the echo mode to give it like frequency shifted, messy type of hit, and it sounds almost like a bongo a little bit. The second fill that happens here is this little like wubby chord thingy. So this is the original thing that I started with, which is just, again, just a chopped up version of the sample, but it's going through redux and a bit of like distortion and stuff. So this just sounds kind of like a little like retro-y a little bit. And then I decided to resample it here and add a filter on top, so it becomes a little bit more fitting with the track. It just sounded a little nicer overall with the rest of the track, because the rest of the track is really stabby, and this one felt a little too sustained. And then this is the sound that I ended up using so much throughout this entire track. The little bell thing is resampled from it. It was like a really, like, honestly really useful thing I sound designed from the original sample. So without any effects, it sounds like this. But with the effects, it sounds like this. It sounds kind of like I named it PS3 Select AB because it sounds like a select button on like a PlayStation. I don't know why. But what's really doing the heavy lifting here is the multipass and the trash. So the trash first is just distorting the hell out of it. And it's doing it by each band because I wanted to do it very clinically, I guess. Honestly, I think the multipass is doing the most work. So again, the filter table here is just makes it sound really spectrally and really pretty in a sense. And I think that's what really ends up making it sound really good overall. And then that ended up being used a lot, reverse the original sample. And then I ended up using that, resampling it, and then using it for these little plucks here. So it's just that with a reverb automation, a little louder, and then... So then it goes into this little like melodic section here, which is the original sample, but with filter table again. It just ended up sounding really spectrally and pretty. It sounds really nice. It's just that with distortion and stuff, and like some volume automations here and there. And then it's also layered with just the original sound, but a little more distorted. That's just the original, again, the original sample with a little bit of saturation and stuff. And then this mid bass actually came from here, but it was before I did any of this effects I was just scrolling through Trash's presets. I don't think it's set to the right preset right now. It was set to some preset that ended up making it sounding really almost like a poop saw. It was like really noisy. I think it just distorted the hell out of the sub to the point where it sounded like white noise. And that ended up being like a good mid bass layer, so I put it under it. And then with the sub together, it sounds really, really beefy. And then second part here is the same as the first, except this fill is a little bit different. So there's this is more like this reso bass type thing, like an old retro reso bass, which is just done by it's the same thing that's happening earlier with the Yoi bass, but I just removed the auto filter and the bit crusher, and just replaced them with phasers. Like there's two phasers back to back, and then yeah, that's like pretty much it for that entire part. The drums are samples I made with actual synths. The kick I made myself, the clap I made myself, or parts of the clap was made by myself. Some of the cymbals I also made myself, and then yeah, just some regular old cymbals and rides and stuff. What's really like helping a lot with this is the clipper on top of all of it, like slamming it together, and it sounds really good overall in the mix. So that's the drums, pretty much throughout the entire track. And then we have the second part here. So there's first part, there's these little mid bass layer that was originally I originally had it for this first section, but I don't think it fit very well, so removed it and only have it in this part, and also later on in the track, it comes in with the last drop. Oh, it's just the sub. So I just resampled the sub and distorted it a lot, put it through some vocoding, and then some comb filtering with the Serum FX. Again, filter table to make it sound a little bit more spectrally. Some erosion, more distortion, and then it sounds like a good first mid bass layer. And then the second part was this main wubby part, which is done from this sound design session. Basically, it's that same like saw thing I showed earlier that I made from the sub, and it's like really like filtered and distorted to oblivion. So I was really trying to get this to sound with the fifth of the sound, like the fifth in the key. So I ended up having to use a frequency magnet to hit A, which was what I really needed. And it was also the reason why I had to resample it here is basically I was also using originally before the frequency magnet, I put a manipulator, which is meant for vocals, but I was originally going to use it just for stereoing, but then I ended up like messing with the harmonics knob and it ended up playing kind of cool. And I resampled it here because it kept changing because the manipulator is not able to understand how that thing is supposed to work. So it kept changing. So I just resampled it here. There's this like top part as well on top of that, which is just it's like the same like stabby bongo thing I showed earlier, but with the echo mode being a little higher. And then there's also a manipulator on it, which is helping with like, again, with the I think I also used the harmonics mode there. I just have it frozen because it kept changing and I kind of wanted it to be a little more static. And then I have at the near the end of the drop, it becomes more like a build up with the frequency shifter slowly getting higher and higher. And then there's like these little fills throughout the entire second half. The main thing is this little like, which is made from the original sample but pitch mapped and distorted. And then it goes into, there's also this other thing that was made from running this little thingy through Portal. And then we have just this entire sample but stretched like really, really long, and then with the beats stretching method. And then there's like these little Reese hits that happen time to time in that second half as like fills. So this is made from the sub, I think, or that little saw thing. That's a little saw thing I showed earlier. And then amp, and then the filter and the phaser is really what's giving it the main Reese kind of sound. More filtering and then some distortion. And then there's these little, okay, this is also kind of cool, which it was like an afterthought when I was making this. I was listening to like a little bit of like references. I was like listening to like other electro house tracks, and a lot of times they'll put like other things in the background to like fill up the space because it's just like 16 notes happening here, so it's a little boring. I had these little like goofy atonal sounding things in the background. So this hits with the clap, and then this hits is just before it. So this is made from that little bell thing that was made earlier. And then it's distorted, and then the echo mode is what's doing a lot of heavy carrying here. So that first, it's just the echo mode with a really, really long smear amount and some reverb. It sounded cool. And then there's like the second hit, which is like it sounds almost like the Good Morning snare. It's echo mode again with the smear. And it's pitched really, really low, and then there's like this like really, really, really weird EQ running in through a more compression, some saturation, and then like a delay and reverb. And it ends up adding a lot of space because without it sounds really static. With it sounds really, it adds more groove to the sounds, so I'm just really, really liking it. And then there's like these like resample versions of that melodic phrase earlier. I just like chopped it up. That's it. And then in the second half of the second half, there's this little offbeat thing that's also made from the bell thingy, from that same like, and then it's just run through like a lot of frequency shifting and reverb. It sounds almost like a tambourine, but in the context of the entire track, it almost also sounds like a chant in the background, but there's no vocals, which is kind of funny. And I thought that was really cool, so I left that. There's also this ARP that comes in the second half. So this was made from a really, really high-pitched version of that original I think I took one of the pads in that sample and like pitched it like really, really high, and then again shifting it again to get it. And then there's some overdrive OTT, like distorted, so it'll play the fundamental a little bit better, and then some crystallizer on top to make it a little bit more like pretty. And then I just resampled it here because it'd be a lot easier to work with it as audio instead of like, oh, there's like a resampled growl here, the same growl from earlier that was made from the sample glitched out here. It's just really, really distorted, and it's also running through this thing called hyper chorus, which is just a bunch of choruses back to back coined by Virtual Riot. And then there's like a shifter to get it like pitch upwards near the end. And then on top of this last hit, there's this little like wing thing that happens on top, which I think is really cool. This is just the pad from the sample, but really distorted, and it's running through like a talk filter, then OTT, some EQing, and then some reverb, and then with a shifter it ends up sounding really, really, really cool. We get into the breakdown. Like the percussion in the breakdown is probably my favorite thing I've done in this entire thing, because it's also made from the sample. So you hear this little, in the background you'll hear this like dystopian sounding percussion sound, and it gets more and more white noisy and distorted as it just progresses, but without any of the effects it sounds really, really funny. So I took the original sound and then shifted it like crazy, and then ran it through a bunch of like Redux and like some shaper box, and then some corpus, and then a lot more distortion, filtering, compression, more shifting, some phasers and flangers, OTT. It's one of my friends was showing me this like kind of cool trick with hybrid reverb. It like messes with the sound of the reverb to make it sound really, almost sounds like a phaser on the reverb, so I thought that was really cool. So I left that. And then there's this little like dystopian, on top of that little thing, there's like a dystopian kick layer. This resampled, like this one real hit resampled, has like a little bit more filtering and some drum bus, just to give it a little bit more knock. This snare is not from the original sample. That's the only other thing that's not from this original sample. It's just a basic 909 snare that's filtering upwards. There's also just a chopped version of the original pad, because I wanted to change the sub bass notes here, so I did that over here, the same sub. As it builds up, it progresses a little bit more, risers and stuff from before. There's the little like moving on to the second drop. So the first thing you hear is this like this really, really big knock 2 sounding saw bass. So that's just the sub resampled in the basic sense. If I remove all the distortion and stuff that's happening here, just the regular sub. And then so it's running through a lot of chorus first to get it a little bit more messy and almost sounding like it's like a unison saw, through a pitch shifter, which is pitching, which is not pitching the entire sound, but it's pitching part of the sound and adding like the fifth of the root note, but like on a higher octave. So then when it distorts together, you can hear it a little bit. And then there's like a lot of distortion happening here. A filter, which is giving that yo 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 yo, and then it's going through OTT and overdrive, another OTT, more chorus, EQing, some filtering and stuff that happens for the build up, and that's it. Top of that is also just the melodic things I was showing earlier, but just a little bit more chopped up with a different portion of the sample. There's also one more change that happens with this knock 2 part is the sub. I ran it through a similar chain, but on top of all of it, there's this thing called crisp, which is kind of like texture, but it's free. And it adds just like a little bit of like really crispy ring modded white noise at on the top that's stereo, and it like. And then also for the first hit, there's these little glitches, and this also happens in the first drop as well. There's like these little glitches that were in there. So this is also made from the original sample. Basically, I took the part that happens here. So there's like that little like, I'll go over it in a second, but there's like this little atonal part that happens after that knock 2 times sounding sound. So this is just resampled to oblivion. So basically, I took that same like thing that's happening there, stretched it really, really long. If I down any effect, it's with the beats like stretch algorithm, and then it's running. What's really giving it the glitchy sound is this is a little trick I learned from Skybreak. You use a pitch shifter on Snap Heap, and you randomize the pitch and turn off like correlation and all that random stuff, and you get like these like and it's like some more vocoding and OTT and stuff to end up sounding. Just took a resample of it, and there's like more chops of it throughout the entire thing. That's it. A little like which is just a resample of the sub, but with like a little bit of like chorus. So let me go into this, like, I don't know how to explain this drop. It just sounds really glitchy and stuff. So I started with this. It's the growl from earlier, but chopped like really, really small. If I turn off all the effects, it sounds like this. I wanted it not to sound like that growl, so I end up adding a lot of distortion. And what really, really makes the sound different is this little KHS, again, filter. So it's like it ends up adding a lot of difference throughout the entire thing, and you can hear it as like a top layer throughout the entire part, like the little bongo thing I was talking about earlier. And there's also this like Zappy Boy, which is made from that saw thingy, the really, really, really distorted sub, and then it's run through some trash, and like basically what's giving it the really zappy sound is this convolver with the phaser 4 impulse. Together it sounds like, and under this is also that mid bass layer I was talking about earlier that happens in the first drop, and then the pluck is playing this like melody, the Reese from earlier that happens here. It plays the like, which is just the little like resampled part from earlier. Second half, I add that art back from earlier that I showed earlier, and then also there's this also cool thing. I took this knock 2 thingy, I ran it through. I took the same chain pretty much, but in this chain there's morph. So it's morphing to the pad here. It's just the pad with like a phaser and some bit crushing effects. And then together it sounds like really, it's not really there, it's not really prominent, but it just kind of adds a little bit more to the stereo field, which is really. And then on top there's like a resample of that first drop stabs. It just has a echo and stuff on top of it. And then it goes back into that same first drop. It just has the little percussion from earlier. And then it goes into the outro here. And this is just the breakdown with everything slowly getting quieter as the track gets longer. And at the end here, there's like a tape stop that plays. And that's it. That's the entire track with everything made from the sample. I hope you learned something and enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing. It'd be really helpful. Maybe if you want, try doing something like I did. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely really different. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.